The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Arizona Territory like the crack of Judgment Day, freezing the blood in Nora Riley's veins as she watched her father's body crumple to the ground. It was the summer of 1878, and in that single moment, everything she knew about her life had been blown away like tumbleweeds in a desert storm. "Pa," she screamed, lunging forward only to be yanked back by rough hands. The three Donovan brothers stood like vultures over her father's body, their faces etched with cold satisfaction. "That settles his debt," said Abel Donovan, the eldest of the brothers, tucking his smoking pistol into his holster. His dark eyes moved to Nora, who was being restrained by the youngest brother, Caleb. Now for the matter of interest. Nora struggled against Caleb's grip, her chestnut hair falling loose from its pins. "You murderers, he was going to pay you back." Abel's laugh was as dry as the parched earth beneath their feet. "6 months overdue?" "I don't think so, Miss Riley." He stepped closer, his shadow falling across her tear-streaked face. "Your pa borrowed a considerable sum to keep that miserable ranch of yours afloat. Now he's gone and payments still due." "We'll sell the ranch," Nora said desperately. "Just give me time, that worthless stretch of dirt," scoffed Matthew Donovan, the middle brother, spitting a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. "Wouldn't cover half of what he owed." Abel nodded slowly, his eyes traveling down Nora's trembling form. She was 22, with a beauty that had turned heads all throughout Mineral Park since she'd blossomed into womanhood. "Fortunately for us, your pa left behind something of value after all." Nora's blood ran cold as his meaning became clear. "No," she whispered. "Yes," Abel replied, a smile spreading across his weathered face. "You'll come with us, cook, clean, and provide other services. Between the three of us, we figure 5 years should settle the debt. I'm not property." Nora shouted, finding her voice and her fury. "You can't just." The crack of Abel's hand across her face silenced her protest. Stars burst behind her eyes as the taste of blood filled her mouth. "We can and we will," Abel said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Your pa signed papers when he was desperate, puts you up as collateral if he couldn't pay." He pulled a folded document from his vest pocket. "It's all legal enough for these parts." Nora's heart sank. Her father had been desperate after the drought killed their cattle and the bank refused another loan, but she never imagined he'd go this far. "Get her on a horse," Abel ordered Caleb. "We're heading back to the ranch before sundown." As Caleb dragged her toward the horses, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. The brothers tensed, hands moving to their gun belts. A lone rider approached at a gallop, silhouetted against the setting sun. As he drew closer, Nora recognized the tall, broad-shouldered figure of Thomas Blackwell, a cowboy who occasionally worked cattle drives through the territory. They'd exchanged pleasantries whenever he passed through, but little more. Thomas pulled his dappled gray to a halt, taking in the scene with eyes as sharp and clear as a mountain lake. His gaze moved from Nora's bruised face to her father's body on the ground, and his expression hardened. "Afternoon, Blackwell," Abel said, his voice falsely cordial. "This is family business. Best ride on." Thomas dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate. "Doesn't look like family business to me." His voice was quiet but carried across the yard. "Looks like a murder and a kidnapping." "The man owed us money," Matthew said, stepping forward. "We're taking what's owed." Thomas's eyes never left Nora's. "You all right, Miss Riley?" She shook her head slightly, tears threatening to spill again. "She's coming with us," Abel declared. "Her pa put her up as payment if he defaulted. We've got papers." Thomas's jaw tightened. "I don't care what papers you have. She's not property. She's a person." Caleb's grip on Nora's arm tightened. "Mind your own business, cowboy." With a movement so swift it seemed almost casual, Thomas's hand moved to his holster and his Colt revolver was suddenly trained on Abel's chest. "This is my business now." Abel's eyes narrowed. "You're outnumbered, Blackwell." "Maybe," Thomas conceded, "but you'll be the first to die. Is she worth that?" The tension stretched like a bowstring ready to snap. Nora held her breath, certain that blood was about to be spilled. Finally, Abel made a small gesture with his hand. "Let her go, Caleb." "But the debt," Caleb protested. "We'll collect another way." Abel cut him off. His eyes burned with hatred as they locked with Thomas's. This isn't over, Blackwell. For today it is, Thomas replied evenly. Miss Riley, please come over here. Caleb released her arm and Nora stumbled toward Thomas, her legs weak with relief and fear. What about Pa? She whispered as she reached his side. We'll tend to him proper, Thomas assured her, his voice gentle despite the gun still trained on the Donovans. But first we need to get you safe. With his free hand, he helped her mount his horse, then swung up behind her, keeping the brothers in his sights. We're riding out now, don't follow. As they rode away, Nora could feel the Donovan's eyes burning into their backs. She knew with certainty that this wasn't over, it was just beginning. Thomas guided his horse at a steady canter away from the Riley ranch. Nora sat rigidly in front of him, her body tense with grief and fear. Only when the ranch had disappeared behind the rolling hills did Thomas slow the horse to a walk. "I'm sorry about your father, Miss Riley," he said quietly. The simple words broke the dam of her composure, and Nora's shoulders began to shake with silent sobs. Thomas said nothing more, just held her steady as she grieved, one strong arm around her waist to keep her from falling. When her tears finally subsided, she asked in a hoarse voice, "Where are we going?" "To town first," Thomas replied. "We need to report what happened to Sheriff Wilson." Nora laughed bitterly. "Sheriff Wilson, he's in the Donovan's pocket, has been for years." Thomas was silent for a moment. "Then we'll go to my camp. It's about 5 miles outside of Mineral Park. You'll be safe there while we figure out what to do next." Nora twisted to look at him. "Mr. Blackwell, I appreciate your help, but this isn't your fight." His blue eyes met her steadily. "I made it my fight when I drew on the Donovans. Besides," he added more gently, "I couldn't ride past and leave you to that fate. Why were you at our ranch anyway?" "I was passing through on my way north. Thought I'd stop and see if your pa needed any help with the herd." His voice lowered. "I heard things weren't going well." Nora turned away, staring at the horizon. They weren't. Pa was desperate after the drought, but I never thought he'd. She couldn't finish the sentence. "Men do foolish things when they're desperate," Thomas said, "but that doesn't make what the Donovans did right." They rode in silence for a time, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats and the creaking of leather the only sounds. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple. "We need to go back for Pa," Nora said suddenly. "I can't leave him there." Thomas nodded. "We will, but not tonight. The Donovans might be waiting." "So we just leave him," her voice cracked. "Just until tomorrow," he promised. "First light we'll go back, but right now I need to get you somewhere safe." Nora wanted to argue but knew he was right. She was exhausted, and the shock of the day's events was beginning to take its toll. She found herself leaning back against Thomas's solid chest, drawing strength from his presence. As the last light faded from the sky, they reached a small camp nestled in a grove of cottonwoods beside a narrow creek. A simple lean-to had been constructed for shelter, and the remains of a small fire smoldered in a ring of stones. Thomas dismounted and helped Nora down, his hands strong and sure at her waist. Her legs buckled slightly as she touched the ground, and he steadied her. "Easy now," he said softly. "Sit by the fire. I'll get it going again." Nora sank down on a log while Thomas tended to his horse, removing the saddle and bridle before letting the animal drink from the creek. Then he rekindled the fire, building it up until the flames danced brightly, pushing back the darkness. "Are you hungry?" he asked, rummaging in his saddlebags. Nora shook her head, then realized he probably couldn't see the gesture in the firelight. "No, thank you." He produced a canteen and offered it to her. "Water then, you need to drink something." She accepted it gratefully, suddenly aware of how parched her throat was. The water was cool and refreshing, and she drank deeply before handing it back. Thomas sat across from her, the fire between them. His face was shadowed but somehow reassuring in its strength. "How long have you known the Donovans?" he asked. Nora wrapped her arms around herself, though the night wasn't cold. "All my life. Their ranch borders ours to the north. They were never friendly, but things changed after Ma died 3 years ago. They started watching me whenever I went to town." She swallowed hard. Abel made offers, said I should be his wife. When I refused, they seemed to take it as a personal insult. Thomas's expression darkened. "And your father borrowed money from them?" "I didn't know until today," Nora admitted. "Pa was proud. Too proud to admit how bad things had gotten. I knew we were struggling, but..." She trailed off, fresh tears threatening. "What will you do now?" Thomas asked gently. Nora stared into the flames. "I don't know. The ranch is all I have, all I've ever known. Is there family you can go to?" She shook her head. "No one. Ma's people are back east, but we haven't heard from them since she died. Pa was alone in the world except for me." A thought struck her. "What about you, Mr. Blackwell? Won't your family be worried about you getting mixed up in this?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "No family to worry, and please call me Thomas." "Thomas," she repeated. "I'm Nora." "I know," he said simply. Of course he did. Mineral Park wasn't large enough for people to be strangers, even if they didn't know each other well. "You should rest, Nora," Thomas said, getting to his feet. "Take the lean-to, I'll keep watch." "You don't have to do that," she protested. "The Donovans wouldn't." "I'm not taking chances," he interrupted firmly. "Not with them." Nora wanted to argue but found she lacked the energy. The events of the day had drained her completely. She crawled into the lean-to where Thomas had laid out his bedroll. "What about you?" she asked. "I'll be fine by the fire." He hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry I don't have more to offer." "You saved my life," Nora whispered. "That's more than enough." As she settled onto the bedroll, she could hear Thomas moving around the camp, checking his rifle, adding wood to the fire. Despite the horror of the day, despite her grief and fear, she felt strangely safe in his presence. Sleep claimed her quickly, but her dreams were haunted by her father's fall, by Abel Donovan's cold eyes, by the feel of Caleb's fingers digging into her arm. She woke with a start in the gray light of dawn, a cry caught in her throat. Thomas was instantly at her side, concern etched on his face. "Nora, are you all right?" She nodded, embarrassed. "Bad dreams." His expression softened with understanding. "That's to be expected." Nora pushed herself upright, wincing at her stiff muscles. "We need to go back for Pa." "We will," Thomas assured her, "after breakfast." He had coffee brewing over a small fire and was frying bacon in a small pan. The domestic normalcy of it struck Nora as surreal. After everything that had happened, they ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they finished, Thomas said, "I've been thinking. The Donovans won't just let this go, they'll come after you again." "I know," Nora said quietly, "but I can't run forever." "No," he agreed, "but we need a plan." He hesitated. "Do you have the deed to your ranch?" "Yes, Pa kept it in a strongbox under his bed." Thomas nodded. "Good. We'll need to secure that, and anything else of value." "Are you suggesting I abandon the ranch?" Nora asked, an edge in her voice. "Not permanently," Thomas said carefully, "but it might not be safe for you there, at least for now. The Donovans know where to find you." Nora stood abruptly, pacing the small clearing. "That ranch is all I have left of my parents. I won't be driven from it." Thomas watched her, his expression thoughtful. "What if there was another way to protect it? And you?" "What do you mean?" He seemed to choose his words carefully. "The Donovans claim your father offered you as payment. What if someone else had a stronger claim?" Nora stared at him, uncomprehending for a moment. Then understanding dawned. "You mean marriage?" Thomas nodded, his expression serious. "It would give you legal protection that you don't have as a single woman. The Donovans couldn't take you without breaking laws that even they wouldn't risk." "Are you proposing to me, Mr. Blackwell?" Nora asked incredulously. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "It would be a marriage in name only. For your protection, once the danger has passed, we could seek an annulment if you wished." Nora was speechless. This man, practically a stranger, was offering to bind his life to hers to protect her from the Donovans. "Why would you do that?" She finally asked. Thomas's gaze was steady. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because I couldn't live with myself if I rode away and left you to face them alone." Nora turned away, her mind racing. The idea was absurd, yet. Was it any more absurd than trying to run the ranch alone while fending off the Donovans? Any more absurd than abandoning her home and everything she'd ever known? "I need time to think," she said quietly. Thomas nodded. "Of course, it's not a decision to make lightly." He began packing up the camp. "Let's see to your father first." They rode back to the Riley ranch in tense silence, both alert for any sign of the Donovans. But the land was quiet, the ranch appearing deserted as they approached. Nora's heart clenched as they rounded the final bend, and she saw her father's body still lying where he had fallen. The Donovans hadn't even had the decency to move him. Thomas helped her down from the horse, then stood back respectfully as she knelt beside her father. His face was peaceful, despite the violent way he had died. Nora brushed a lock of gray hair from his forehead, her tears falling silently. "I'll get a blanket to wrap him in," Thomas said quietly, heading toward the house. Nora stayed with her father, murmuring a prayer that her mother had taught her long ago. She was still kneeling there when Thomas returned, a clean blanket in his arms. Together, they wrapped James Riley's body with care. Thomas lifted him gently, carrying him to a spot beneath the old oak tree where Nora's mother was buried. "I'll dig the grave," Thomas said. "You should go inside, gather what you need." Nora wanted to protest, to insist on helping, but she knew he was right. There were things she needed to secure before they could leave. Inside the small ranch house, everything was as it had been yesterday morning when her father had ridden out to meet the Donovans, hoping to negotiate more time. The coffee pot still sat on the cold stove. Her father's favorite pipe lay on the table beside his worn Bible. Fighting back fresh tears, Nora went to her father's bedroom and pulled the heavy strongbox from beneath the bed. The key hung on a chain around her neck, alongside her mother's simple gold cross. Inside the box, she found the deed to the ranch, her parents' marriage certificate, and a small leather pouch containing her mother's wedding ring and a few other pieces of jewelry. There was also a folded letter addressed to her in her father's uneven handwriting. With trembling fingers, Nora opened it. "My dearest Nora," it began. "If you're reading this, I fear I've made a terrible mistake that I cannot undo. I borrowed money from Abel Donovan when the bank refused me. The terms were harsh, but I was desperate to save the ranch, to save your future. I thought I could pay it back before the note came due. I was wrong. Abel has made it clear what he intends if I cannot pay. I cannot bear the thought of you in his hands or those of his brothers. I would rather die first. Forgive me for my pride, for my foolishness. Know that everything I did out of love for you and for the memory of your mother. If the worst happens, run. Do not try to keep the ranch. Your life is worth more than this land. Go east to your mother's family. Start again. Live the life your mother and I always wanted for you. I love you always, Pa." Nora clutched the letter to her chest, fresh sobs racking her body. Her father had known what might happen. Had he gone to meet the Donovans expecting to die, a soft knock at the door startled her. Thomas stood in the doorway, his face somber, hands dirty from digging. "It's ready," he said simply. Nora nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Thank you." She tucked the important papers and jewelry into a small bag along with the letter. Then she gathered a few clothes and personal items. There wasn't much she could take, but she couldn't bear to leave behind the small photograph of her parents on their wedding day, or the quilt her mother had made for her 16th birthday. Outside, Thomas had dug a grave beside her mother's. They lowered her father's body into the earth together, and Nora recited what she could remember of the burial service from her mother's funeral. Then Thomas filled in the grave while Nora gathered wildflowers to place on top. When it was done, they stood side by side, the morning sun now high in the sky. "What do you want to do now?" Thomas asked gently. Nora stared at the twin graves, her mind made up. "I'll accept your offer, Thomas Blackwell, but not as a temporary measure." She turned to face him, her expression resolute despite the tears still drying on her cheeks. "If we're to do this, let it be a real marriage. I won't have the Donovans thinking they can simply wait us out." Thomas's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded. "If that's what you want." "It's what I need," she corrected. "And I think it's what Pa would have wanted, someone honorable to help me protect what he built." Thomas took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "Then I promise to be that man, Nora Riley. I'll protect you in this land with everything I have." The sincerity in his voice touched something in Nora's heart, a tiny flicker of something other than grief and fear. It wasn't love, how could it be, when they barely knew each other? But it was a beginning, a small ember of possibility in the darkness. "We should go to town," Thomas said. "Find the preacher and make this official as soon as possible." Nora cast one last glance at her parents' graves. "Yes, and then we come back. This is my home. I won't be driven from it." Thomas smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "Our home now. And no one's going to take it from us." They rode into Mineral Park an hour later, Nora on her father's mare and Thomas on his gray. The small mining town was bustling with its usual activity, miners heading to the saloon after their shift, women shopping at the general store, children playing in the dusty street. As they tied their horses in front of the church, Nora was acutely aware of the stares they were attracting. News traveled fast in a town like Mineral Park. The church was empty except for Reverend Thompson, who was sweeping the floor between the pews. He looked up in surprise as they entered. "Miss Riley, Mr. Blackwell," he greeted them, his expression turning solemn as he took in Nora's red-rimmed eyes. "I heard about your father, Miss Riley. My deepest condolences." "Thank you, Reverend," Nora said quietly. "We've just come from burying him." The Reverend's bushy eyebrows rose. "You didn't wait for a proper funeral." "There wasn't time," Thomas said, stepping forward. "The circumstances of James Riley's death were complicated. The Donovans shot him," Nora said bluntly. "And they intend to take me as payment for a debt." Reverend Thompson's face paled. "Dear God." "That's why we're here," Thomas continued. "We would like you to marry us today." The Reverend looked between them, clearly surprised. "This is very sudden." "It is," Nora acknowledged, "but it's necessary. The Donovans claim my father signed papers offering me as collateral. As a married woman, I'll have protection under the law that I don't have now." "I see," Reverend Thompson said slowly, "but marriage is a sacred covenant before God, not just a legal arrangement." "We understand that," Thomas said firmly. "And we're entering into it with the proper respect and commitment." The Reverend studied them for a long moment. "Do you love each other?" The direct question caught Nora off guard. She glanced at Thomas, who met her gaze steadily. "We respect each other," Thomas answered carefully. "We share common values. The rest can grow with time." It was a diplomatic answer, but honest. Nora appreciated that he hadn't lied. Reverend Thompson sighed. "In ordinary circumstances, I would insist on a longer engagement, counseling, proper banns being read. But these are not ordinary circumstances." He straightened his shoulders. "I will marry you today, but I want your promise that you'll come to me for guidance if you face difficulties in your marriage." "We promise," Nora said, relief washing through her. "Good, let me find Mrs. Thompson to be a witness." The Reverend hurried toward the small parsonage attached to the church. Left alone, Nora and Thomas stood in awkward silence. "Are you certain about this?" Thomas asked quietly. "It's not too late to change your mind." Nora shook her head. "I'm certain, are you?" Thomas took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "I meant what I said to the Reverend. Respect is a good foundation. The rest can come with time." Before Nora could respond, the church door burst open. Sheriff Wilson strode in, followed by Abel Donovan. "Thought I might find you here," the sheriff said, his hand resting on his gun belt. "There's been some serious accusations made." Thomas moved slightly, putting himself between Nora and the two men. "James Riley was murdered in cold blood. That's not an accusation, it's a fact," Abel sneered. "Self-defense. He drew on me first." "That's a lie," Nora said fiercely. "My father wasn't wearing his gun." Sheriff Wilson shrugged. "It's your word against his, Miss Riley. And Mr. Donovan here has two brothers who will back his story. 3 against 1, Abel said with a smirk. "Besides, your pa owed me money, signed papers saying you'd work it off if he couldn't pay." "She's not property," Thomas said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Those papers have no legal standing." "Maybe not back east," Sheriff Wilson conceded, "but out here a man's word is his bond." "James Riley gave his word." "Under duress," Nora argued. "You forced him, threatened him." Abel's face darkened. "Watch your accusations, girl, or what?" Thomas challenged. "You'll shoot her too?" Abel's hand moved toward his holster. "I might shoot you, cowboy, not in my church." Reverend Thompson's voice rang out as he returned with his wife. "This is a house of God, gentlemen. I will not have violence here." Sheriff Wilson had the grace to look abashed. "No disrespect intended, Reverend. We're just sorting out a legal matter." "It seems to me, Mrs. Thompson said firmly that this young woman has made her choice clear. She's here to marry Mr. Blackwell, not to be claimed like a piece of property." Abel's jaw clenched. "She belongs to me. Her pa signed papers." "She belongs to herself," Thomas said, his hand finding Nora's again. "And in a few minutes, she'll be my wife." Unless you intend to shoot the sheriff, the reverend, his wife, and me, you'd best accept that." A tense silence filled the church. Abel's face contorted with rage, but even he seemed to recognize that he was outmaneuvered, at least for the moment. "This isn't over," he finally snarled, "not by a long shot." "For today it is," Reverend Thompson said firmly. "Now I must ask you and the sheriff to leave. I have a wedding to perform." Sheriff Wilson looked uncomfortable but nodded. "Come on, Abel, let's go." Abel gave Nora one last, hate-filled glance before following the sheriff out of the church. When they were gone, Mrs. Thompson hurried to Nora's side. "Are you all right, dear? You look pale as a ghost." Nora managed a weak smile. "I'm fine, it's been a difficult day." "I can only imagine," the older woman said sympathetically. "But a wedding is still a joyous occasion, even in sad times. Let's see if we can't make you look a bit more bridal." She led Nora to a small side room where she fussed with her hair, pinning it up more neatly and adding a small sprig of dried lavender from her own pocket. "Something borrowed," she explained with a wink. Nora was touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. Call me Martha, dear. We're about to be on a first-name basis, after all." She studied Nora's face. "Do you want to talk about it? This is all very sudden." Nora hesitated, then found herself telling Martha everything: her father's death, the Donovans' claims, Thomas's intervention and proposal. Martha listened without interruption, her kind face showing nothing but compassion. When Nora finished, she took the young woman's hands in her own. "Life rarely follows the path we expect, my dear. I didn't expect to marry a preacher and end up in a mining town in Arizona territory, but here I am, and I've never regretted it." She smiled gently. "Your Thomas seems like a good man. The way he stood up to Abel Donovan speaks to his character." "He is a good man," Nora agreed. "I just wish that you were marrying for love," Martha finished for her. "Love can grow, Nora, especially when it's built on respect and shared purpose, and from what I can see, you have both of those things with Thomas." Nora nodded, taking comfort in the older woman's words. "I'm ready now," she said, standing up straighter. Martha squeezed her hands once more, then led her back into the church, where Thomas and Reverend Thompson were waiting. Thomas's eyes widened slightly as he saw her, and for the first time since her father's death, Nora felt a flutter of something other than grief or fear in her chest. He had changed too. His hair was combed, his face freshly washed, and he'd put on a clean shirt that Martha must have found for him. The ceremony was simple and brief. Reverend Thompson spoke of commitment, of facing life's challenges together, of building a partnership that honored God and each other. Thomas repeated his vows in a clear, steady voice, his eyes never leaving Nora's face. When it was her turn, Nora was surprised at how calm she felt, how right the words seemed despite the unusual circumstances. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thompson said, closing his Bible. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Thomas hesitated for just a moment before leaning down to place a gentle, chaste kiss on Nora's lips there first. It lasted only a second, but Nora felt it down to her toes. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Blackwell," Martha said, embracing Nora warmly. "Thank you for everything," Nora said, emotion threatening to overwhelm her again. "I wish we could offer you a proper wedding supper," Reverend Thompson said apologetically. "That's kind of you, but we should get back to the ranch before dark," Thomas replied, glancing at the window where the sun was already beginning its descent. They said their goodbyes, Thomas pressing some money into the Reverend's hand for the church, despite the older man's protests. Outside, they found a small crowd had gathered, news of their hastily arranged wedding having spread through town. There were a few friendly faces: old Jim from the livery stable, Mrs. Parker from the general store, but most looked merely curious or openly suspicious. Thomas helped Nora onto her horse with a steady hand, then mounted his own. As they rode out of town, Nora could feel eyes following them, and she wondered how many people believed the Donovans' version of events. "Are you all right?" Thomas asked as they left the town behind. "Yes," Nora said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "I feel safer, knowing that what happened in there was real." Thomas nodded. "It is real. I meant every word of those vows, Nora." "So did I," she said quietly. They rode in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The land stretched out around them, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. It was beautiful in its harsh way, the rugged mountains in the distance, the scattered Joshua trees, the vast open sky. "I've been thinking," Thomas said eventually. "We should bring in the cattle that are left. Keep them close to the ranch for now." Nora nodded. The practical discussion was a relief after the emotional intensity of the day. "There's not many, maybe 20 head at most." "It's a start," Thomas said. "The land is good even with the drought. With work, we can build it back up." His use of "we" warmed something inside Nora. This man who had been a stranger yesterday was now talking about building a future together. As they crested the final hill before the ranch, Thomas suddenly reined in his horse, throwing up a hand for Nora to stop as well. "What is it?" she asked, alarmed by his tense posture. "Smoke," he said grimly, pointing toward the ranch. Nora looked and felt her heart drop. A thick column of dark smoke was rising from the direction of the ranch house. "No," she whispered, spurring her horse forward. Thomas caught up with her quickly. "Nora, wait, it could be a trap." But she couldn't wait, couldn't bear the thought of losing the home her parents had built, where all her memories lived. She rode hard, Thomas right beside her, until they came in sight of the ranch. The house was engulfed in flames, the fire having already consumed most of the structure. The barn was burning too, and the corral fence had been broken down, the few horses that had been penned there nowhere to be seen. "The Donovans," Nora said, rage and grief making her voice shake. "They did this." Thomas dismounted quickly, scanning the area with narrowed eyes. "Stay here," he ordered, drawing his rifle from its scabbard. "They might still be around." "Thomas," Nora began, but he cut her off. "Please, Nora, I can't help if I'm worried about you." She nodded reluctantly, watching as he moved cautiously toward the burning buildings, rifle ready. She held her breath until he returned a few minutes later, his face grim. "No one's here," he reported. "They're long gone, and they took everything they could carry before they set the fire." Nora dismounted slowly, her legs shaky beneath her. She walked toward what remained of her home, stopping a safe distance from the fierce heat of the flames. There was nothing to be done. The fire had too much of a head start. "Everything's gone," she said, her voice hollow. "Everything my parents built, all our memories." Thomas came to stand beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Not everything, we still have the land, we have each other, we can rebuild." Nora turned to him, his face blurred through her tears. Why would they do this?" "They wanted the ranch. What good does it do them to burn it down?" "It's not about the ranch anymore," Thomas said quietly. "It's about revenge. Abel Donovan's pride was hurt when you chose me over him. This is his way of showing power." "What are we going to do?" Nora asked, feeling suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "Where will we even sleep tonight?" Thomas's expression softened. "I noticed a lined shack about a mile north of here when we rode in yesterday. It's not much, but it will give us shelter while we figure out our next steps." Nora nodded, too drained to argue or question. She allowed Thomas to help her back onto her horse, taking one last look at the burning remnants of her childhood home before turning away. The lined shack was as basic as Thomas had suggested: a single room with a small wood stove, a rickety table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed frame with a straw mattress. But it was shelter, and it was still standing. Thomas got a fire going in the stove while Nora numbly arranged what little they had. The silence between them was heavy with all that had happened, with the enormity of the changes a single day had brought. "I'm sorry," Thomas said finally, breaking the silence. "About your home, about everything." Nora looked up at him, this man who was now her husband, who had stood between her and danger without hesitation. "You have nothing to be sorry for. You saved my life. And brought destruction to your home," he countered. "No," she said firmly. "The Donovans did that, not you." She moved to stand before him, meeting his troubled gaze. "Thank you, Thomas, for everything you've done today." He reached out slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "I wish I could have done more." The tenderness of the gesture, after a day of violence and loss, was Nora's undoing. A sob escaped her, and then another. Thomas hesitated only a moment before drawing her into his arms, holding her as she cried for her father, for her home, for the life that had been irrevocably changed. His embrace was strong, comforting. Nora clung to him, taking solace in the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek, in the gentle way his hand stroked her hair. When her tears finally subsided, she remained in his arms, reluctant to move away from the first place she'd felt safe all day. "We'll get through this," Thomas murmured against her hair. "Together." Nora nodded against his chest, then slowly pulled back to look up at him. His blue eyes were filled with concern, with a warmth that made her breath catch. "It's been a long day," he said softly. "You should rest." Nora glanced at the narrow bed, then back at Thomas, suddenly aware of what the night meant for their hasty marriage. Thomas followed her gaze, and understanding dawned in his eyes. "I'll sleep on the floor," he said quickly. "You take the bed." "Thomas," Nora said, finding her voice. "You don't have to do that. We're married now." His expression was carefully neutral. "It's been a difficult day. You need rest, not complications." Nora felt a rush of gratitude for his consideration, his respect for her emotional state. "Thank you," she whispered. They prepared for bed in awkward silence, Thomas making a pallet on the floor with his bedroll while Nora took the narrow bed. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as she listened to Thomas's steady breathing in the darkness. "Thomas," she whispered eventually, "are you awake?" "Yes," came his quiet reply. "What will we do tomorrow?" There was a pause before he answered. "Assess what we have left, round up any cattle that didn't scatter, start making plans to rebuild." "The Donovans will come back," Nora said, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her. "I know," Thomas admitted, "but we'll be ready for them next time. How can we fight them? It's 3 against 2 and they have the sheriff in their pocket." Thomas was silent for a long moment. Sometimes direct confrontation isn't the answer. Sometimes you have to outthink your enemy. "What do you mean?" "I have some ideas," he said. "But let's talk about them in the morning. You need to rest now." Nora wanted to press him for details, but recognized the wisdom in his words. She was exhausted, physically and emotionally drained. "Good night, Thomas," she murmured. "Good night, Nora," he replied softly. "Sleep well." Despite her fears, despite the hardness of the straw mattress, Nora fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, comforted by the presence of the man who had so unexpectedly become her protector, her partner, her husband. Dawn broke clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the single dirty window of the lined shack. Nora woke slowly, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then memory flooded back her father's death, her hasty wedding, the destruction of her home. Thomas was already up, his pallet rolled neatly and stowed in the corner. He stood at the small stove, cooking something that smelled like bacon. "Morning," he said when he noticed she was awake. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," Nora admitted, sitting up and running a hand through her tangled hair. She felt grimy and disheveled, acutely aware that she'd slept in her clothes, that she had no change of clothes, no brush for her hair, none of the basic necessities she'd always taken for granted. Thomas seemed to read her thoughts. "I found a stream about 50 yards behind the shack. It's clean water, and," he hesitated, looking slightly embarrassed, "I keep a spare shirt in my saddlebag. It would be big on you, but it's clean." Nora felt a rush of gratitude. "Thank you." "That would be wonderful." After a simple breakfast of bacon and coffee, Nora took Thomas's spare shirt and went to the stream. The water was cold but refreshing as she washed her face and hands, then changed into Thomas's shirt. It hung almost to her knees, and she had to roll the sleeves several times, but the clean cotton felt heavenly against her skin. When she returned to the shack, Thomas had a map spread on the table. "I've been thinking about our situation," he said without preamble. "The Donovans want us gone or dead. They'll keep coming until they get what they want." Nora nodded grimly. "So what do? "We need allies," Thomas said. "The Donovans have power in Mineral Park because they have money and they're not afraid to use violence, but they've made enemies too." "Like who?" "The Garcias, for one. Their ranch is east of here. Abel Donovan has been trying to push them off their land for years, claiming their Mexican land grant isn't valid." Nora had met Elena Garcia a few times in town. She was a proud woman, running the ranch with her sons since her husband's death. "You think they'd help us?" "I think they'd welcome the chance to stand against the Donovans," Thomas said. "There are others too, small ranchers who have been bullied, miners who have been cheated. People who are afraid to stand alone but might stand together." "A coalition," Nora said slowly, warming to the idea. Thomas nodded. Exactly. The Donovans rule through fear. If enough people stand against them, that power diminishes. But first we need to secure what's left of our own ranch, Nora pointed out. Yes, I'll ride out today, see if I can round up any cattle that didn't scatter too far. Maybe find some of your horses, too. I'm coming with you, Nora said firmly. Thomas looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it. All right, but we stay together, no splitting up. They spent the day on horseback, scouring the range for the Riley cattle. By mid-afternoon, they'd managed to locate and drive 15 head back to a small pasture near the line shack, where a spring provided water. They also found 2 of the ranch horses, a bay gelding, and an old pinto mare grazing in a meadow about 3 miles from the burned-out ranch house. As they rode back toward the line shack, Nora studied her husband covertly. Thomas Blackwell was a mystery to her in many ways. He handled himself with the quiet competence of a man used to solving problems on his own. He was kind but reserved, speaking little unless he had something meaningful to say. "How long have you been in Arizona territory?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. "About 5 years," Thomas replied. "Came west after the war." "You fought in the war between the states," he nodded, his expression closing slightly. "Union side, Ohio regiment. And your family, gone," he said simply. "My parents died before the war, no siblings, no one waiting for me to come home." There was a story there, Nora thought, but she didn't press. They all had their ghosts. "What about before yesterday?" she asked instead. "I'd seen you in town a few times, but never knew much about you." Thomas's mouth quirked in a slight smile. "Not much to know. I've been working cattle drives mostly, ranch hand jobs in between, saving up to buy my own place someday." "Well," Nora said wryly, "you got one sooner than you expected." Thomas glanced at her, concern in his eyes. "Nora, I want you to know this ranch is yours. I'm not trying to take it from you." "It's ours now," she corrected him. "That's what marriage means, doesn't it? Sharing what we have." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or appreciation. "Yes," he agreed quietly. "That's what it means." As they approached the line shack, Thomas suddenly reined in his horse, his posture alert. "What is it?" Nora asked, alarmed. "Someone's been here," he said, pointing to fresh hoofprints in the dirt near the shack. "Recently?" Thomas drew his revolver. "Stay behind me," he instructed, dismounting and approaching the shack cautiously. Nora followed, her heart pounding. Had the Donovans found them already? Thomas pushed the door open slowly, gun raised. Nora held her breath, expecting the worst. "Elena," Thomas said in surprise, lowering his weapon. Nora peered around him to see Elena Garcia sitting at their small table. The Mexican woman rose gracefully, her dark eyes moving from Thomas to Nora. "Senor Blackwell," she greeted him, then turned to Nora. "Senora Riley. Or should I say Senora Blackwell now? News travels fast, even to those of us who do not go to town often." "Mrs. Garcia," Nora said, stepping forward. "This is a surprise." "I heard what happened," Elena said, her expression softening with sympathy. "Your father, your home, the Donovans." She spat the name like a curse. "How did you find us?" Thomas asked, holstering his gun. "My son Miguel saw the smoke yesterday. He rode close enough to see what had happened, then spotted you riding this way." Elena's expression was grim. "The Donovans have gone too far this time." "We think so too," Thomas said carefully. Elena's eyes flashed. "You think? They murdered Senora Blackwell's father. They burned her home. What more would it take for you to be certain?" "Elena," Nora interjected gently. "We agree with you. We were just discussing how to stand against the Donovans when we found you here." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "Good, because I did not come just to offer condolences. I came to offer alliance." Thomas and Nora exchanged a surprised glance. "What kind of alliance?" Thomas asked. "A combining of forces," Elena said, her accent becoming more pronounced as her passion rose. "For too long, the Donovans have bullied and threatened those who stand in their way. They have killed before my husband, though it could never be proven. Others, too." Nora sat down heavily, the weight of Elena's words sinking in. "You think my father wasn't their first victim?" Elena shook her head sadly. "No, child, but he may be the last if we stand together." "What exactly are you proposing?" Thomas asked, taking a seat across from Elena. My sons and I have 20 vaqueros who work our ranch, all loyal men who hate the Donovans as much as we do. There are others who would join us, the Petersons, whose youngest son was beaten nearly to death by Matthew Donovan in a dispute over water rights. Old Jim Turner, whose daughter was bothered by Abel until she fled to California. A coalition, Thomas said, echoing his earlier conversation with Nora. Strength in numbers, Alina nodded firmly. Exactly. The Donovans are 3 men, dangerous men, yes, but still only 3. If we stand together, they cannot fight us all. What about Sheriff Wilson? Nora asked. He's firmly in their pocket. The sheriff is a coward who follows whoever has the most power, Alina said dismissively. If he sees the tide turning against the Donovans, he will not risk himself for them. Thomas looked thoughtful. It could work. But we'd need to be careful. The Donovans won't take this lying down. They'll strike back hard. Let them, Alina said fiercely. We will be ready. Nora studied the older woman's determined face, feeling a stirring of hope for the first time since her father's death. When do we start? Alina smiled, a hard, satisfied expression. We already have. My sons are speaking with the others today. Tomorrow we meet at my ranch to make plans. As night fell, Thomas and Nora were alone again in the line shack, both lost in thought after Alina's visit. Do you think it will work? Nora asked, breaking the silence. This coalition, Thomas was quiet for a moment, stoking the small fire in the stove. It's our best chance, he finally said. But it will be dangerous, Nora. The Donovans won't go quietly, I know, she said softly, but I can't live in fear of them forever. And I won't let my father's death go unanswered. Thomas turned to face her, his expression serious. Revenge is a dangerous path, Nora. It's not about revenge, she insisted. It's about justice. It's about making sure they can't hurt anyone else the way they hurt my family. Thomas studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. All right, we'll do this, but we do it smart, not angry. Anger makes people careless. Nora recognized the wisdom in his words. Agreed. They prepared for bed in the same awkward dance as the night before, Thomas making his pallet on the floor while Nora took the narrow bed. Thomas, she said as he blew out the lamp. Yes, thank you, for standing with me, for everything. In the darkness, she couldn't see his expression, but his voice was warm when he replied. Always, Nora. I meant what I said in those vows. Nora lay awake long after Thomas's breathing had deepened into sleep, thinking about the man who had so unexpectedly become her husband, her protector, her partner in this dangerous stand against the Donovans. She had married him for safety, for protection, but she was beginning to realize that Thomas Blackwell was a man worth knowing for far more than the security he provided. The next day dawned clear and hot, a typical Arizona summer day. After a quick breakfast, they rode to the Garcia Ranch, a sprawling property with a handsome adobe house at its center. Unlike the modest Riley Ranch, the Garcia place spoke of generations of careful stewardship and prosperity. They were met in the courtyard by Alina and her 2 sons, Miguel and Alejandro, both tall young men with their mother's proud bearing and their father's broad shoulders. Welcome, Alina greeted them warmly. Come inside, the others will be arriving soon. The interior of the Garcia home was cool and comfortable, with thick walls that kept out the heat and beautiful woven rugs covering the tile floors. Alina led them to a large room where a long table had been set up. Over the next hour, more people arrived: the Peterson family, old Jim Turner, the Wilsons, no relation to the sheriff, who ran a small mining claim, and several others. Some Nora knew by sight, others only by reputation. All had suffered in some way at the hands of the Donovans. Once everyone was seated around the table, Alina stood. Thank you all for coming, she began. We are here today because we share a common enemy. The Donovans have terrorized this region for too long. They have stolen land, cattle, and lives. Her gaze moved to Nora. Most recently, they murdered James Riley and burned his ranch when his daughter refused Abel's advances. A murmur of anger moved through the assembled group. It's time we stood together, Alina continued. United, we are stronger than they are. United, we can reclaim our land, our safety, our dignity. What exactly are you suggesting? Asked John Peterson, a weathered rancher whose face bore the scars of hard living. We can't just gun them down, much as some of us might like to. No, Thomas spoke up. We work within the law whenever possible, but we also make it clear that their reign of terror is over. How? Old Jim Turner demanded. Sheriff's in their pocket, judge too, probably. We start by protecting each other, Thomas said. No one stands alone against the Donovans anymore. They threaten one of us, they face all of us. That's fine for defense, Alejandro Garcia said, but what about taking action? They still hold power in Mineral Park. We undermine that power, Nora said suddenly, finding her voice. All eyes turned to her. The Donovans rely on fear and intimidation. They need people to be too afraid to stand against them. If we show that we're not afraid, others will join us. The girl has a point, John Peterson nodded. Half the town quietly hates the Donovans but is too scared to show it. We need to be smart about this, Thomas cautioned. The Donovans won't take kindly to being challenged. They'll strike back. Let them, Miguel Garcia said fiercely. We'll be ready. The discussion continued for hours, plans being made and refined. They would form patrol groups to watch over each other's properties. They would stand together in town, making it clear that the days of Donovan intimidation were over. They would gather evidence of the Donovans' crimes, not just James Riley's murder, but all the others that had been covered up over the years. By the time the meeting concluded, a sense of purpose and determination had replaced the fear that had held them all in its grip for so long. As people began to leave, many stopped to offer condolences to Nora and congratulations on her marriage, an odd combination that reminded her just how unusual her circumstances were. "Will you stay for supper?" Elena asked as the last of the visitors departed. Nora glanced at Thomas, who nodded. "We'd be honored," she said. The meal was a welcome change from the simple fare they'd been living on: rich stew, fresh tortillas, and vegetables from Elena's garden. As they ate, the conversation turned to more personal matters. "How long have you known each other?" Miguel asked, his dark eyes curious. Nora and Thomas exchanged a glance. "Not long," Thomas admitted. "Our marriage was hastily arranged." Elena's expression was knowing but not judgmental. Sometimes the heart knows quickly what the head takes time to learn. Nora felt herself blushing. "It was a practical decision," she explained. "For protection." "At first, perhaps," Elena said with a small smile, "but I see how he looks at you, young Nora, and how you look at him when you think no one notices." Now it was Thomas's turn to look uncomfortable. Alejandro laughed, breaking the tension. "Leave them be, Mama," he chided gently. "Not everyone wants their feelings discussed at the dinner table." Elena conceded with a graceful nod, but the knowing look in her eyes remained. Nora found herself wondering if there was truth in the older woman's words. Did Thomas look at her in a special way? And did she look at him with more than gratitude or respect? After dinner, as they prepared to leave, Elena took Nora aside while Thomas spoke with Miguel about patrol schedules. "I have something for you," Elena said, pressing a bundle into Nora's hands. "Some clothes that belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to Tucson. They should fit you, more or less." Nora was touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Elena, for everything." The older woman clasped Nora's hands in her own. "We are allies now, more than that, friends. Whatever comes, you are not alone." The ride back to the line shack was quiet, both Nora and Thomas absorbed in their own thoughts. The meeting had gone well, better than either had dared hope. For the first time since her father's death, Nora felt a sense of purpose, of forward movement, instead of simply reacting to the Donovans' cruelty. "Do you think it will work?" she asked as they neared the shack, echoing her question from the night before. Thomas considered for a moment before answering. "I think we have a chance, more than we did yesterday." Nora nodded, accepting his cautious optimism. "What happens next? We start rebuilding," Thomas said simply. "We show the Donovans and everyone else that we're here to stay." The determination in his voice warmed Nora. This man who had been a stranger 3 days ago was now fully committed to fighting alongside her, to rebuilding what the Donovans had destroyed. "Thank you," she said softly. Thomas glanced at her, puzzled. "For what?" "For giving me hope again." His expression softened, and for a moment, Nora thought he might reach for her hand. But the moment passed, and they rode the rest of the way in companionable silence. Inside the line shack, Nora opened the bundle Elena had given her. There were 2 simple dresses, a nightgown, undergarments, and even a hairbrush small luxuries that meant the world after losing everything. "Elena is very kind," Thomas observed as Nora held up one of the dresses. "Yes," Nora agreed. "I'm beginning to understand why my father always spoke highly of the Garcias, even though we didn't know them well." Thomas nodded. "They're good people, strong but fair." He hesitated, then added, "Like you." Nora looked up, surprised by the compliment. "Me?" "Yes," Thomas said simply. "You've faced things that would break many people, Nora. You lost your father, your home, everything familiar. Yet here you stand, planning how to fight back instead of running away." "I don't feel strong," Nora admitted. "Most of the time I'm terrified." "That's what courage is," Thomas said quietly. "Being afraid but doing what needs to be done anyway." Their eyes met across the small room, and something passed between them: understanding, respect, and perhaps something more. For the first time, Nora truly looked at the man she had married, the strength in his face, the kindness in his eyes, the way he carried himself with quiet dignity. "I'm glad it was you," she said, the words coming out before she could consider them. Thomas tilted his head questioningly. "What do you mean? I'm glad it was you who came riding up that day. I'm glad it's you I'm facing this with." Her cheeks felt warm, but she held his gaze. A smile slowly spread across Thomas's face, transforming his serious expression. "I'm glad too, Nora." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Then Thomas cleared his throat and turned away. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." Nora nodded, feeling both disappointed and relieved at the broken moment. She was still sorting through her feelings for this man, still grieving her father, still adjusting to all the changes in her life. There would be time for whatever was growing between them. That night, for the first time, she dreamed not of her father's death or the burning ranch, but of Thomas, his steady presence beside her as they rebuilt their home. His smile as he looked at her across a table in a house yet to be built, his hand warm in hers as they faced the future together. The next morning brought a new determination. After breakfast, they rode to what remained of the Riley ranch house. The ruins had cooled enough that they could safely approach. Nora steeled herself as they walked through the charred remnants of her childhood home. "We'll build again," Thomas said, standing beside her as she looked at the blackened stones that had once been the fireplace where her mother had taught her to cook. "Better than before." Nora nodded, surprisingly dry-eyed. She had done her grieving, now it was time to look forward. "Yes, we will." They spent the day assessing what could be salvaged and planning what needed to be rebuilt first. The barn would come before the house, they decided. With winter still months away, they could make do with the line shack for shelter, but the animals would need protection sooner. As the sun began to set, they were interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Both tensed, Thomas's hand moving to his gun, but it was Miguel and Alejandro Garcia who rode into view, leading a wagon loaded with lumber and tools. "What's all this?" Thomas asked as the brothers dismounted. Miguel grinned. "Building materials. Mama said you would be starting to rebuild soon, and we had extra from our last project." "We can't accept," Nora began, but Alejandro cut her off. "You can and you will," he said firmly. "This is what the alliance means. We help each other." Thomas and Nora exchanged a glance, then Thomas stepped forward, offering his hand to each of the brothers in turn. "Thank you. We won't forget this." "No need for thanks," Miguel said easily. "We'll be back tomorrow with a few of our men to help with the building." Many hands make light work, as Mama always says. After the Garcia brothers left, Nora and Thomas stood looking at the pile of lumber, tangible proof that they weren't alone in their fight. "Things are changing," Nora said softly. Thomas nodded. "For the better, I hope." Over the next 2 weeks, their lives fell into a new pattern. Each day brought allies to help with the rebuilding: the Garcias Vaqueros, the Petersons, old Jim Turner, and others who had joined their coalition. By the end of the second week, a new barn stood where the old one had burned, and the foundation for a house had been laid out. The Donovans were suspiciously quiet during this time, leading some to hope that they had recognized the changing tide and decided to back down. Thomas, however, remained vigilant, never going far without his weapons, always keeping an eye on the horizon. They're planning something, he told Nora one evening as they sat outside the line shack, watching the sunset. Abel Donovan isn't the type to accept defeat. Nora nodded, having come to the same conclusion. What do you think they'll do? I'm not sure, Thomas admitted, but we need to be ready for anything. Their answer came the next day when John Peterson rode up to the line shack at a gallop, his horse lathered with sweat. Donovan's rustled half my herd last night, he reported grimly. Shot one of my hands who tried to stop them. Thomas was on his feet immediately. Is he alive? Barely, Peterson said. Doc's with him now, but it doesn't look good. This is it, Thomas said, meeting Nora's eyes. They're testing us, seeing if the alliance will hold. What do we do? Nora asked. We respond, Thomas said firmly. All of us together. John, ride to the Garcias. Tell them what happened. I'll alert the others. Within hours, the core members of the alliance had gathered at the Peterson ranch. The wounded ranch hand, a young man named Billy, had died despite the doctor's best efforts. Murder, old Jim Turner said flatly, plain and simple. Sheriff Wilson needs to hear about this, Thomas said. Even if he's in the Donovan's pocket, we need to make our case official. He'll do nothing, John Peterson said bitterly. He never does when it's the Donovans. This time is different, Thomas insisted. This time it's not just you making the accusation, it's all of us. They rode into Mineral Park as a group 20 men and women, including Nora, who had refused to stay behind. The town fell silent as they made their way to the sheriff's office, townspeople watching from doorways and windows. Sheriff Wilson was playing cards with his deputy when they entered. He looked up in annoyance, which quickly turned to alarm as he registered the size and determination of the group. What's all this? He demanded, standing up. Murder and rustling, Thomas said bluntly. Billy Johnson was shot last night while the Donovans stole cattle from the Peterson ranch. Wilson's eyes narrowed. That's a serious accusation, Blackwell. You got proof? We have witnesses, John Peterson said, stepping forward. And the bullet that killed Billy matches the ones the Donovans use in their rifles, special order from back east. Wilson looked uncomfortable. Still not enough for an arrest. Could have been anyone using that kind of ammunition. Sheriff, Thomas said, his voice quiet but carrying authority, you have a choice to make. You can do your job and investigate this murder, or you can keep looking the other way. But understand this, we won't be intimidated anymore. The Donovan's days of ruling through fear are over. The sheriff glanced at the crowd filling his office, clearly calculating the shifting power dynamics. I'll look into it, he finally said, but I can't promise anything. It wasn't much, but it was more than any of them had expected. As they left the sheriff's office, there was a feeling of cautious triumph among the group. He's hedging his bets, Alina observed astutely, seeing which way the wind blows. Let's make sure it keeps blowing our way, Thomas replied. Their next stop was the Mineral Park Gazette, the small newspaper run by Howard Jenkins, a former Eastern journalist who had come west for his health. Jenkins was known for his principled stands, even when they weren't popular. We want to tell our story, Thomas explained after introducing the group. About the Donovans, about Billy Johnson's murder, about James Riley, about all of it. Jenkins listened intently, his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed spectacles. You know this will make you targets, he warned. Even more than you already are. We already are targets, Nora said firmly. The difference is now we're standing together. Jenkins studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I'll print it, front page of next week's edition. As they left the newspaper office, Nora felt Thomas's hand slip into hers. She looked up at him, surprised by the public gesture. You were magnificent in there, he said softly, for her ears alone. Your father would be proud. Nora squeezed his hand, warmth spreading through her at both the compliment and the simple, intimate contact. Thank you. They were nearly to the edge of town when a voice called out, well, isn't this touching? Abel Donovan stepped out from the saloon, his brothers flanking him. The street cleared quickly, townspeople ducking into doorways or hurrying in the opposite direction. Thomas moved slightly in front of Nora, though he kept hold of her hand. The rest of their group fanned out, presenting a united front. Donovan, Thomas acknowledged coolly. Out for a drink in the middle of the day, or just looking for more innocent people to murder, Abel's face darkened with anger. "Watch your mouth, Blackwell. Accusations like that can get a man killed." "Is that a threat?" Thomas asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Just a fact of life," Abel replied with a cold smile. "People who talk too much tend to have accidents in these parts." "Not anymore," Elena Garcia said, stepping forward. "Those days are over, Abel." Abel's gaze shifted to her, contempt plain on his face. "Keep out of this, Mexican." "This isn't your fight." "It is now," Miguel said, moving to stand beside his mother. "We all stand together." Abel looked at the group arrayed against him, and for the first time Nora saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by his usual arrogance. "Enjoy your little coalition while it lasts," he sneered. "It won't be long before you're all back to hiding in your homes, hoping we don't come calling." "We're not afraid of you anymore, Abel," Nora said, finding her voice. "You killed my father, burned my home, and tried to claim me like property. But you failed. And you'll keep failing because we're stronger together than you three will ever be." A muscle twitched in Abel's jaw. "You'll regret those words, girl." "The only thing I regret," Nora replied evenly, "is that I didn't stand up to you sooner." For a moment, it seemed Abel might go for his gun. Thomas tensed beside Nora, his free hand hovering near his holster. But then Matthew placed a restraining hand on his brother's arm. "Not here, Abel," he muttered. "Too many witnesses." Abel glared at them for a long moment, then spat on the ground. "This isn't over," he growled before turning and stalking away, his brothers following as they watched the Donovans go. Thomas squeezed Nora's hand. "You all right?" She nodded, her heart racing but her resolve unshaken. "Yes, for the first time in a long while, I think I really am." That night back at the line shack, Nora couldn't stop replaying the confrontation in her mind. "Do you think we made a difference today?" she asked Thomas as they prepared a simple supper. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "We showed the town that people are willing to stand against the Donovans. We showed the sheriff that he can't ignore their crimes anymore. And most importantly, we showed the Donovans themselves that their power is slipping." "They'll fight back," Nora said, voicing the fear that had been nagging at her. "They will," Thomas agreed grimly, "but we'll be ready." After supper, they sat outside, enjoying the cool evening air. The line shack was becoming cramped after 2 weeks of shared living, but work on their new house was progressing rapidly thanks to the help of their allies. "Thomas," Nora said after a comfortable silence had stretched between them. I've been thinking about what Elena said." "About our marriage." Thomas turned to look at her, his expression carefully neutral. "What about it?" Nora gathered her courage. "We married for protection, for safety, but these past 2 weeks, I've come to know you, to respect you, too." She hesitated, then pressed on, "To care for you." Thomas was very still, his eyes never leaving her face. "Nora, I'm not saying I expect anything," she hurried on. "I know this isn't how either of us planned our lives to go, but I wanted you to know that I don't regret our marriage, not anymore." Thomas reached out slowly, taking her hand in his. "I don't regret it either," he said softly. "Not for a moment." Their eyes met in the gathering darkness, and Nora felt something shift between them, a crossing of some invisible boundary that had kept them apart despite their marriage vows. Thomas's free hand came up to gently touch her cheek. "Nora," he murmured, and the way he said her name made her heart skip a beat. "May I kiss you? Properly this time, not just for the ceremony." In answer, Nora leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their lips met hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. It was nothing like the brief, chaste kiss they had shared in the church. This was a real kiss, full of promise and awakening feelings. When they finally parted, Nora was breathless, her heart pounding. Thomas's eyes were dark with emotion as he looked at her. "I never expected this," he admitted, his voice husky. "When I rode up to your ranch that day, I was just trying to do the right thing." "And now?" Nora asked softly, a smile spread slowly across his face. "Now I'm thinking that doing the right thing was the best decision I ever made." The gunshots came just before dawn, shattering the pre-dawn stillness and jolting Nora and Thomas from sleep. They had finally shared the narrow bed, though their intimacy had gone no further than kisses and close embraces, both silently agreeing to take things slowly despite their married status. Thomas was on his feet instantly, grabbing his rifle. "Stay down," he ordered as more shots rang out. Who is it? Nora asked, pulling on Alina's borrowed dress. Has to be the Donovans, Thomas replied grimly. He peered cautiously out the small window. I count 3 riders circling the shack, shooting high trying to scare us rather than hit us for now. Another volley of shots, closer this time. One bullet splintered the wooden door. So much for shooting high, Thomas muttered. What do we do? Nora asked, keeping low as she moved to his side. They're trying to draw us out, Thomas said. If we stay put, they'll eventually have to come closer or give up. And if they come closer. Thomas checked his rifle, his expression grim. Then I'll be ready for them. The shooting paused and a familiar voice called out, Blackwell, send out the woman and we'll let you live. Never going to happen, Donovan, Thomas shouted back. You're outnumbered, Cowboy. Abel's voice was taunting. 3 against 1, those aren't good odds. Better than you think, Thomas replied. The shooting resumed, more intense this time. Bullets thudded into the wooden walls of the shack. Nora flinched with each impact but stayed calm, loading Thomas's spare revolver as he had taught her over the past weeks. We need to hold out until help comes, Thomas said, firing a careful shot through the window. Help? Nora asked. The Garcia ranch is only a few miles away. They must have heard the shooting by now. As if on cue, a new sound joined the gunfire hoofbeats, many of them approaching fast. The shooting from the Donovan's direction faltered, then stopped. Sounds like the cavalry's arrived, Thomas said with grim satisfaction. They heard shouting, more shots, then silence. Thomas kept his rifle trained on the door, unwilling to lower his guard until he was certain of who was outside. Thomas, Nora. It was Miguel Garcia's voice. It's safe now, Thomas exhaled slowly, lowering his rifle. Stay behind me, he told Nora as he moved to open the door. Outside, the scene that greeted them was chaotic. Miguel and Alejandro Garcia sat on their horses, rifles ready, while several of their vaqueros surrounded Matthew and Caleb Donovan, who had been disarmed and were sitting on the ground, hands raised. Where's Abel? Thomas asked sharply, scanning the area. Miguel's expression was grim. He tried to run, took a bullet in the shoulder but managed to stay on his horse, headed north. He won't get far bleeding like that, one of the vaqueros said in Spanish-accented English. The desert will finish him if the wound doesn't. Thomas nodded, his arm around Nora's shoulders as they stepped fully outside. Thank you for coming, they had us pinned down. We heard the shooting, Alejandro explained. Mama sent us with as many men as could be spared. He glanced at his brother. Seems we arrived just in time. What happens now? Nora asked, looking at the 2 captured Donovans. Matthew's face was a mask of hatred, while Caleb looked more frightened than angry. Now we take them to town, Miguel said firmly. Sheriff Wilson can't ignore murder and attempted murder when the culprits are delivered to his doorstep. Thomas nodded. I'll come with you. No, Miguel shook his head. You stay with your wife. Make sure Abel doesn't double back. We have enough men. Thomas hesitated, clearly torn between wanting to see justice done and needing to keep Nora safe. He's right, Nora said softly. We should stay together. After a moment, Thomas nodded. All right, but send word as soon as they're locked up. The Garcias promised they would, and soon the group was riding toward town, the Donovan brothers securely bound and surrounded by armed vaqueros. Left alone again, Thomas insisted on checking the area around the line shack to ensure Abel hadn't returned. Nora stayed close, the loaded revolver in her hand. Do you think it's really over? She asked as they stood looking out over the land that would soon support their rebuilt home. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Not quite, he finally said. Not until Abel is caught, but it's close, Nora. The Donovan's power is broken. The town saw them for what they are. With Matthew and Caleb in jail, Abel is alone. And dangerous, Nora added. Thomas nodded, putting his arm around her. Yes, which is why we stay vigilant, but we also keep living, keep building. We don't let fear rule us. Nora leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from his solid presence. I want to start working on the house today, she decided. I'm tired of living in this shack, of putting our lives on hold because of the Donovans. Thomas smiled, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Then that's what we'll do. Word came from town that evening. Matthew and Caleb Donovan had been locked up, charged with the murder of Billy Johnson and the attempted murder of Thomas and Nora Blackwell. Sheriff Wilson, sensing the change in public opinion, had been surprisingly cooperative, especially after Howard Jenkins arrived at the jail to cover the story for his newspaper. Abel was still at large, but search parties had been formed to track him down. The general feeling was that he wouldn't get far with a bullet in his shoulder, especially in the summer heat. 3 days passed without incident. Work on the new house progressed rapidly, with help continuing to arrive from members of their alliance. The frame was up, the roof partially completed. Soon, they would have a real home again. Nora found herself watching Thomas as he worked, admiring the strength in his shoulders as he lifted roof beams, the patience he showed in teaching her how to lay floorboards, the respect he commanded from the men who came to help. Their evenings in the lined shack had taken on a new sweetness as their relationship deepened beyond the practical arrangement it had begun as. They talked long into the night, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future. Nora learned about Thomas's childhood in Ohio, his difficult years during the war, his decision to come west seeking a fresh start. She told him about growing up on the ranch, about her mother's quiet strength and her father's dreams for their land. "He would have liked you," Nora said one night as they lay side by side on the narrow bed, Thomas's arm around her shoulders. He always said he wanted me to find a man of principle." Thomas smiled in the darkness. "I wish I could have known him better." "Me too," Nora said softly. "But I think he'd be happy with how things turned out despite everything. He'd be glad I found you." Thomas's arm tightened around her. "I'm the one who found something precious, Nora, something I never expected." She turned her face up to his, their lips meeting in what had become a familiar, yet still thrilling connection. Each kiss felt like a promise, a step toward the deeper intimacy that both knew would come when they were ready. On the 4th day after the Donovans' attack, Miguel Garcia rode up to the construction site where Thomas and Nora were working on the new house. "They found Abel," he announced without preamble. Thomas straightened from where he'd been measuring a window frame. "Alive," Miguel shook his head. "Dead. His horse threw him when he tried to cross the ridge north of here. Broke his neck in the fall. Search party found him this morning." Nora felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief that the threat was ended, a certain grim satisfaction that justice had been served, but also a hollow feeling that Abel's death meant her father's murder would never be fully accounted for in a court of law. "It's over then," Thomas said quietly, coming to stand beside her. Miguel nodded. "The Donovan reign of terror is finished. Matthew and Caleb will hang for Billy's murder, according to Jenkins at the newspaper. The evidence is too strong, and with Abel dead, no one's intimidated anymore. People are coming forward with stories going back years." "Thank you for bringing the news," Nora said. After Miguel had gone, Nora and Thomas stood in silence for a long moment, absorbing the reality that the shadow that had hung over them since the day they met was finally lifted. "How do you feel?" Thomas asked gently. Nora considered the question. "Relieved," she finally said, "but also, I don't know, empty somehow, as if I've been so focused on surviving, on fighting back, that I don't know what comes next." Thomas took her hand, his expression understanding. "What comes next is living, Nora, building our home, making a life together, not because we have to for safety, but because we want to." "Do we?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "Want to, I mean, now that the danger is past, you don't have to stay, you could go back to your own plans." Thomas looked surprised, then hurt. "Is that what you think, that I would leave now?" "No," Nora said quickly, "but I want to be sure. I need to know that you're staying because of me, not because of a promise made in desperation." Thomas's expression softened. He reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. "Nora Blackwell, I'm staying because somewhere between saving you from the Donovans and building this house with you, I fell in love, deeply, completely in love." Nora's breath caught in her throat. "Thomas." "You don't have to say it back," he said quickly. "I know it's been fast and you've been through so much. I just needed you to know that my feelings for you are real and they have nothing to do with promises or obligations." Nora felt tears welling in her eyes, but they were tears of happiness, not grief. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have for a while now, but I was afraid to admit it, even to myself. It felt too soon, too complicated with everything else happening." Thomas's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "It is soon," he acknowledged. "But sometimes, life doesn't give us the luxury of taking things slowly. Sometimes it throws us together and says, 'Here, this is where you belong.'" "With you," Nora said, stepping into his embrace. "This is where I belong." Their kiss was different this time, not tentative or questioning, but filled with certainty, with the knowledge that what had begun as a desperate arrangement had transformed into something deep and genuine. That night, for the first time, they truly became husband and wife in every sense, their bodies joining as their hearts already had. Afterward, lying in each other's arms in the cramped confines of the line shack, they talked about the future, the house they would finish building, the cattle they would raise, the family they hoped to create together. "I never thought I could be this happy again," Nora confessed, her head resting on Thomas's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "After Pa died, after everything was taken from me, I thought that part of my life was over." Thomas's hand stroked her hair gently. "Sometimes the darkest moments come right before the dawn," he said softly. "I was drifting for years after the war, never staying in one place, never letting myself get attached. Then I rode up to your ranch that day and everything changed. For both of us," Nora agreed. 6 months later, the new house was completed, larger and sturdier than the original, with a stone fireplace that would keep them warm through the winter and a wide porch where they could sit in the evenings, watching the sunset over the land they both loved. The Donovan threat was long gone. Matthew and Caleb had been tried, convicted, and hanged for their crimes. Their ranch had been sold to pay restitution to their victims, with the Peterson family receiving the largest share for Billy's death. The alliance that had formed to stand against the Donovans remained, transforming from a defensive coalition into a supportive community. Barn raisings, cattle drives, harvests all became communal events where neighbors helped neighbors, strengthening the bonds that had been forged in adversity. On a crisp December evening, Thomas and Nora hosted a gathering at their new home to celebrate both the house's completion and Christmas. The Garcias were there, along with the Petersons, old Jim Turner, and many others who had stood with them against the Donovans. The house was filled with laughter, music, and the rich smells of holiday cooking. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Elena Garcia embraced Nora warmly. "Your parents would be proud," she said, glancing around the beautifully appointed home. "You have built something wonderful here." "Thank you," Nora said sincerely, "for everything. We wouldn't be here without your help." Elena waved off the gratitude. "That is what community means. We help each other." Her sharp eyes noted the way Thomas's hand rested protectively on Nora's waist. "And when will you announce your happy news?" Nora blushed, though she wasn't entirely surprised by Elena's perception. The older woman had an almost uncanny ability to read people. "Soon," she promised. "We wanted to be sure before telling everyone." Elena nodded approvingly. "A baby is a blessing, the greatest one." After all the guests had departed, Nora and Thomas stood on their porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear winter sky. Thomas's arms were around her, his hands resting gently on the slight swell of her stomach where their child grew. "Happy?" he asked, his breath warm against her hair. "Completely," Nora replied, leaning back against his solid strength. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible," Thomas said. "I came to Arizona searching for something, though I didn't know what. Turns out it was you. It was this life we're building together." Nora turned in his arms to face him. "Who would have thought that the worst day of my life would lead to the best?" Thomas's smile was tender as he bent to kiss her. Life has strange ways of working out sometimes. As they stood together under the vast Arizona sky, Nora thought about the journey that had brought them here, how 3 brothers had wanted her as payment for a debt, and a brave cowboy had declared she wasn't property and taken her away. How hatred and violence had tried to destroy them, but love and community had proved stronger. "I love you, Thomas Blackwell," she whispered, the words still new enough to thrill her. "And I love you, Nora Blackwell," he replied. "Forever." Hand in hand, they walked into their home, closing the door on the past and stepping into the future. They would build together a future founded not on fear or obligation, but on the love that had blossomed in the most unlikely of circumstances in the wild Arizona territory. 5 years later, the Blackwell Ranch was thriving. The drought that had devastated James Riley's cattle had long since ended, and under Thomas's careful management, their herd had grown to over 200 head. The house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family: 4-year-old James, named for Nora's father, and 2-year-old Elizabeth, named for Thomas's mother. Mineral Park had changed too. The town had grown, attracted by the rich silver mines and the increasingly stable community. Howard Jenkins's newspaper now published twice weekly, instead of once, and a proper school had been built where Nora taught 3 days a week while Elena Garcia watched the children. On a warm spring day, Thomas and Nora sat on their porch, watching James and Elizabeth play in the yard with Miguel Garcia's young son. The children's laughter carried on the breeze, a sound that never failed to warm Nora's heart. "Do you ever think about how all this started?" she asked, leaning against Thomas's shoulder. He glanced down at her, a smile playing around his lips. "You mean with me riding to the rescue like some knight in dusty chaps?" Nora laughed, the sound as free and joyous as her children's. "Something like that. Though as I recall, you were pretty dusty. And you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, even with tears on your face and murder in your eyes for the Donovans." His arm tightened around her. "I knew right then that you were special. Enough to marry a woman you barely knew," Nora teased. "Best impulsive decision I ever made," Thomas replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the children play. The past 5 years hadn't been without challenges: droughts, harsh winters, the normal difficulties of ranch life, but they had faced them together, their bond strengthening with each obstacle overcome. Reverend Thompson was right, Nora mused. About what? About marriage being more than a legal arrangement, about it being a sacred covenant. She turned to look at her husband, this man who had become her partner in all things. "I didn't understand that when we stood in that church 5 years ago. I do now." Thomas's eyes, still as blue and clear as the day they met, held hers with a depth of feeling that made her heart skip. "So do I," he said softly. As the sun began to set, painting the Arizona sky in shades of orange and purple, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the darkest day of her life had come the greatest happiness she had ever known. What the Donovans had intended for evil had somehow been transformed into something beautiful and lasting. Thomas was right, she thought, as he called the children in for supper. Life did have strange ways of working out sometimes, and she wouldn't change a single step of the path that had led her to this moment, to this man, to this family that was their own creation. "Coming?" Thomas asked, holding out his hand to her. Nora smiled, taking his hand and rising to follow him into the home they had built together. "Always," she said, and she meant it with all her heart.